tonight, we will be hearing from Jordan Hunt and Ethan Wise on corn and silage feed-out best practices. So Jordan Hunt is the owner of Hunt Dairy Consulting, LLC. His full-service dairy nutrition consulting firm serves dairies in Iowa, Southeast Minnesota, Northwest Illinois, and Southwest Wisconsin. Helping his clients achieve maximum production while managing input costs and promoting animal health and sustainability are the fundamentals that drive Jordan's business. He specializes in feeding and inventory management, forage and commodity procurement, record and herd performance analysis, calf and heifer management, forage and crop plans, feed center layout and efficiency, and team building. An honors graduate of Iowa State University with majors in dairy science and agricultural business, Jordan was active in the student affiliate division of the American Dairy Science Association and has continued his involvement in ADSA as a professional member, as well as being an active member in the ARPAS Association. He and his wife Amanda and their daughters Peyton and Skylar reside in Northeast Iowa, less than a mile from the family dairy farm on which he grew up. And he's going to be joined, we're going to have a little bit of a joint presentation with Ethan Wise of Foresight Farms. Foresight Farms is located near Decorah, Iowa in northern Winneshiek County and is owned and operated by the Wise family. The farm has 1,070 head of Holstein milk cows, 900 replacement heifers, 500 head of crossbred cattle on feed, and 2,800 acres of cropland. The dairy herd is bred and fed for high production and is currently producing 106 pounds of energy-corrected milk per cow per day. And how far are you from the Minnesota border? Less than a mile?
We're only about a mile away, so yeah, we're right there.
Yeah, you're on the right side of the border, though.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So Ethan is a graduate of Decorah High School and Iowa State University with a degree in agronomy. He is part owner of Foresight Farms, and his main focus is on the cropping operations and feeding the milking herd. He is married to his wife, Allie, who is an area agronomist for Pioneer Seed Company, and together they have an 11-month daughter named Adeline, who goes by Della. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to our speakers, and they will kick off discussion tonight with a little presentation.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, so Ethan and I put together a brief presentation around best practices for corn silage feeding. And our goal here is really just to share, the consultant perspective and then the dairy perspective within, kind of the key areas that we're looking at. Before I dive into it, just briefly, I did want to talk about Feed Fit being an initiative that is a unique service and education offering from GPS. And the reason I bring it up is this is the foundation of what we do as nutrition consultants and when we're focusing in the feed center. It's a module-based program that helps dairies understand the feed financials, be able to trace inventories and track KPIs in the feeding center. It's definitely a continued improvement type of program. So it's not like you do a module and you check the box and you never have to come back to it. We always want to continue to find new, ways and really push each other to be the best we possibly can, and of course in a positive manner. So tonight we'll actually be touching over half of the modules. We have 9 of them, but when you think about feed out, you have your forage quality, clean feed, usually a feeding software's involved, feeder training, and then most certainly loading and mixing. And this last year, Ethan's family farm actually hosted a feeder training. They did an awesome job of bringing us in and giving us the opportunity to have other feeders come. We all learned a little bit, and also just a great networking opportunity. So anything there, Ethan, that you want to touch on in regards to the feeder training?
No, I think probably my main takeaway on that is that felt the feeder training has really offered a lot of value to some of our employees. It's kind of like raising children. Your mom and dad can tell you something probably 20 times over and you're not really going to listen. But when you can get an employee, off the farm away from their manager, that is that probably mom or dad figure, and to an industry professional, and they're hearing, some of the same things that you're talking about on the farm from somebody else. You really get that buy-in. So that's been a great tool for us to utilize on our farm.
Yep, and we're always trying to expand the program as well. So for tonight, when we start this thing off, my goal and then Ethan's goal on the farm level is every day we want to provide a fresh, high quality, well mixed, non-sortable ration. Super easy, right? Well, if it was super easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Unfortunately, there are things that happen that are out of our control, whether it's major weather event, maybe there's something going on with equipment being broke down, could be employee related that then all of a sudden, takes us away from an ideal situation at the bunk. But at the end of the day, this is what we're striving for, to achieve maximum, production and health of the herd. And, in the coming slides, we want to touch on what we feel those things are that really makes this happen, and minimize any kind of inconsistency that can possibly come up.
Yep.
So the first,
I would echo that. I would say that's probably one of the, I think our farm does well at getting fresh feed there that's not sorted, that's dropped uniformly along the bunk. I'll be completely honest, probably the biggest area that we struggle with is consistent push-ups. A lot of that drives back to just have a lot more hands in the pot there. The mixers on our farm, we've got a couple guys that are mixing together. Whereas the push-ups, there's probably 3 or 4 guys, throughout the day and night shifts that have their hands in there, get impacted by down cows, parlor running ahead or behind. So that's probably one of our biggest struggles. So if anybody figures that out down to a T, let me know.
Feed quality is really the backbone then of getting, a healthy, productive cow. And so here's just a couple pictures of, not ideal silage. This is the top of a corn silage. You got kind of that burnt ring from the tire, and then some visible mold. There's a zero tolerance in my eyes when consulting as far as any kind of suspect feed going into milk cow diets. The way I look at it is like they're Olympian athletes, right? Like you got to have the best possible feed. Otherwise, if you don't, they're going to get sick or just simply not produce as much as what we all want. So if you are in a situation where you have spoilage, want to be pitching that. Here's some alfalfa silage, which I know is not the point of tonight's talk, but it's a good picture and it highlights, the amount of visible mold there. So when pitching it, which no one actually likes to pitch feed, right? Like it's a pain in the butt and it takes a lot of time. But if you have this, you need to pitch it. But then I always recommend too, going a couple inches under, that line, that spoilage line, and pitching maybe even a little bit of quote unquote good silage, because it's still suspect given the contact that it had with that bad feed. Any comments to offer there, Ethan, on your farm? Hopefully you don't ever have any, right? So
yeah, never do. No, I'd be lying if I said that. I would say what's made the biggest change for us is obviously using inoculant on the chopper. Then we're using another spray over the top inoculant, an oxygen barrier, and then black and white plastic on top of that. Sounds like you guys kind of covered that in some previous webinars. The only other thing that I would say that, especially on our corn silage bunkers, when those get a little bigger, maybe take us, 3-4 days to fill some of those. If you can, if you're working that progressive wedge shape, you can get that tarp, start covering it on the backside as you're maybe still filling the front. Limit that oxygen. That has helped us a lot. And then, we're pitching too as you get to something like that.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you're dealing with a lot of this on your dairy, you want to find the root cause. I mean, you got to deal with the circumstance at hand, but you want to hopefully be able to mitigate it in the future. Overall face management, we want to keep a really tight face. Obviously, we want to keep oxygen out. Oxygen is not our friend when it comes to secondary fermentation and the growth of wild yeast. In this picture here, you'll see it obviously taken in the summer, but it was defaced fairly well. It's a tight face with an average temp of 88 degrees. So typically, like your corn silage face, if whatever the ambient air temp is, assuming that you did everything right, it's going to be within a few degrees of that. So you don't have to feel like you did something wrong because your silage face is 87 degrees and it's 92 degrees outside. That's just the reality situation. Now, what we don't want is you face a bunch of feed and you got it all spread out here, and all of a sudden that stuff's 101 degrees and you're off to the races before you ever even add it to the TMR as far as it heating and getting wild yeast and whatever other bad pathogens could be in there. And lastly, I really try to have farms deface what they need for the day in the summer. Like, you really don't want leftovers. If you do have leftovers, if you have the ability to get it under roof in your feeding center so that the sun can't beat on it for the rest of the day, that's most ideal. Otherwise, tidy it up in the bunker and try to pack it down, and then make for sure that that's the first stuff used the next day, as long as it is not suspect. Ethan can talk more as far as actual defacers and equipment and provide a little more insights there.
Yep. So we use a rotary style defacer on the farm. I know there's some rakes, whatnot out there. We've never had any experience with them. Always stuck with a rotary style. Like the job it does, especially in haylage. Your tougher crop to get defaced. Echo a lot of what Jordan said. Keep it tight. Our feeders and myself, I enjoy seeing how close I can get that. How close you can come out at the end of the day, as far as having any feed left. The only other thing I'd add, so as you have a peak at the center of your bunker pile, maybe you can't get that what's left over under a roof or something like Jordan was alluding to, but making sure, like with us, when we come in with our payloader towards the end, you kind of turn and you go parallel with the face of the pile, trying to get the last little bit that's there if you're real tight. And then so you end up pushing all the feed and up against one wall, like in a bunker, up against one wall or the other. Well, that's also where, if you have a rain event in the shape of a lot of our bunkers, that's where all that water is going to end up coming. So might seem like a small thing, but if there is any left, you can't get it on the roof, at least putting it in a pile in the center, right up against the face, so you're not getting a bunch of water moving through that if you do have a rain event.
Awesome point. And my last point on face management is safety, and not to be taken lightly. Of course, this is really managing a tight face. You can see this is a rake, it just has a little more undulation in it, but it's still kept really tight. But point being here is when you draw a line from the base up, straight, there's quite a bit of tip back here. Okay. And the value of that is, you think of silage on average, you have 65% water up here and a lot of gravity working against it. And so if you have a face like this one over here, all of a sudden you can be prone to silage collapses. And the last thing we want on any of the dairies is employee, being down here and getting hit by a silage collapse, or up top working tires and it caves away. So just something that I always bring up, and if you see this on your farm, try to get it corrected. This is faced really well. It's just cupped, versus being more angled like this face over here.
Yep, I would agree with that. Also, probably another thing on that is, so if you do have a bunker that you're into, I know some people have had it happen. We've had it happen on our farm. You get most of the way through a bunker, but you aren't able to finish it before you have to refill. So you're budding up some new crop to old crop. Really communicating with your feeders on where those two crops meet. Had probably 4 to 12 foot of the newer crop that you butted up against the old crop, all cave off in one go. So obviously that's a huge safety concern. And even if you do have back angle on it, you're not necessarily going to know that's coming. So, whenever we're getting to a spot like that, we're cutting plastic back quite a ways so that we're not anywhere near that face when we know that transition is coming up. And then the only other kind of face / plastic management is, so when you're first going into a bunker and you're going up a slope, for us, it's been really critical to manage that plastic appropriately while you're going up it. Leave that plastic long enough that it kind of drapes over the front of that face to be able to keep water out of the entirety of that slope coming down into your face, and obviously dramatically impacting your dry matters and leading to some heating on the face there.
As transitions, the biggest thing here is whenever we're changing bunkers or piles, whether it's within the same cropping season or different cropping season, we want to provide the opportunity to get our arms wrapped around, what's this new bunker pile going to be testing like. So in general, you can do it in a week's time. I used to always feel like it had to be more like 2 weeks, but then it almost felt like we're dragging them out too long and getting, faces that were a little compromised because we weren't feeding enough out of 2 new piles. So anyway, a 7-day type program, I typically would do, you're a third of the new, 2/3 old, and you're half and half, and then you're 2/3 of the new pile and 1/3 old. And this has worked really well to provide, opportunity for the rumen to really adapt to the change and make it seamless as far as, shouldn't see anything production wise. If anything, very, very minimal versus an abrupt start and abrupt end type of feeding strategy. And then it's not uncommon, especially when we're talking corn silage, like, we could have starch differences of 2, 3, 4% from one pile or bunker to the next. So this allows myself to, get diets changed and make sure we have things in order, and we can be much more proactive versus being reacted to us. So Ethan, is this kind of mesh with how you guys do it, or you have a little different take?
Nope, that's pretty much exactly how we manage it. It was probably covered previously, but it's important when you're sampling or when you're filling to sample when you're going in. So then you have a pretty good idea of what you're coming up against. I know probably 3-4 years ago, we were one of the first herds kind of in the area. We were a little tight on corn silage. Rolled into new crop corn silage a little sooner than most people probably would like to, and just got our clock cleaned by some mycotoxin issues that caught us completely off guard. So not only your nutritional sampling, but also mycotoxin sampling, so you know what you're getting into. And then, not only does this help the cows make the transition fairly seamlessly, it also allows you to pull samples, when you are breaking into that pile, get samples sent off to the lab as you're coming into that new feed to really resample that feed out to know what you're getting into. I will say that most feeders hate it because you're, pretty much takes twice as long to have to run to two different piles. So getting buy-in and explaining why that's happening and the importance behind that is of value to make sure that everyone understands why it's happening, just not that it just needs to be done type of mentality.
Yeah, great points. Your moistures and dry matters are something that sometimes get overlooked, but they're so critical, especially when we're talking about corn silage specifically. It's typically fed at a really high volume on most of our farms. I mean, it's an awesome feed, and we've found ways to really maximize it in diets as long as inventory allows. I personally want to have it checked at least once a week minimum. And when we're talking rain or snow events, there should be even more frequency. And this is a nice little graph done by Wise in 2012. And a study they did, they just look at a 14-day time period and checking dry matters on different feeds. So got corn silage and alfalfa silage, and from the lowest to the highest in a 14-day window. I mean, you're talking a 10 unit spread. Now, is that going to be in every case? No, but I mean, some harvest years that very well can happen. And we just want to make sure that whenever you're suspicious of a change, whether it's your bunks are getting too long or too short, or like feeders like Ethan and other folks, you're really good at knowing your bucket weights. And so when you start kind of seeing your bucket weights starting to shift, you want to be doing dry matter checks. This just provides more consistency and actually ensures that the diet on paper is getting fed, because we do the diets on dry matter basis, and you guys are feeding as fed, so we gotta have the moistures accounted for accurately.
Yep, I would agree with that. I will say on the corn silage, about the time that so we sample weekly. After we get done defacing, everything's put into one pile at the face, and then we sample at that point in time right away in the morning after it's defaced. With corn silage, about the time you are questioning, why am I doing this? Because your dry matter is pretty well static. That is exactly when you need to be sampling, because that's when it'll inevitably change. So boring is good, but it may seem a little redundant at times, but definitely it adds value.
Most certainly. There's quite a few instruments out there that can be used. Coster testers most common. I also have farms that have used air fryers, same type of concept. The forage oven, I wouldn't say is as common, but it kind of mimics that commercial lab drying. It's very accurate. You can do multiple samples at once, so that's the value of the forage oven. And you certainly can do multiple samples with a Coster. You just got to own multiple Coster testers then. And then the timing, you're going to be about an hour by the time you grab your sample, dry it down, weigh it, and all that good stuff. These NIR handhelds are definitely coming into the market more and more. They've partnered with labs to get a larger database and improve their accuracy. And I do have a couple farms that have been using them here for a little while and are really growing to like it. You can have results within a few minutes. And so, if it's raining on a morning you're feeding, I mean, you could literally check multiple times during that feeding and really capture that change. You still got to have your same sampling practices like Ethan's talking about, commingling pile and, multiple checks and that sort of stuff. But there's going to be more and more in these, and there should be. I mean, we have a lot of technology in this world. Only makes sense that you would think we could kind of figure out how to get a lot quicker dry matters on farm.
Yep, I would agree. Another thing that has added value for our farm, it's not going to replace those, but more kind of on an inventory management dry matter type deal. We have a John Deere forage harvester, and it has a harvest lab on there, so we're able to track dry matters through that by piles. So we're able to tell, at least when you're doing an inventory type deal, that you have a pretty good idea of an average dry matter for that pile. Not necessarily utilizing that at feed out, but that has been a tool that has definitely paid for itself on our farm.
Just a few quick recommendations when it comes to running your dry matters. You definitely want a kitchen scale. You don't want to be doing the spring loaded ones, just not very accurate. And then we are realistic in the sense of, if it's the middle of winter and there's a snowstorm, you're going to be worrying about getting roads opened up and employees in for, the second shift. And you're not so worried about cooking down your sample for that day's feeding. So we do have general guidelines, and like a major snow event or rain, we would recommend just reduce that dry matter 2 units on the corn silage for that feeding. Certainly want to get it checked at some point in time in that day, but understand that timing is not always there to be able to do it right away at the start. Lastly, and I know Gail wants to open up for discussion, is just around loading deviations. We can put the best diets together in the world, but if we're not going to be accurate with loading and checking how we're doing on a regular basis, then we're probably not going to achieve the results that we want. And so for silage, we want to be 30 pounds dry matter plus or minus that target call weight on the mixer. So on an as-fed basis, you're around 85 pounds. And in this example, there was 200 loading actions observed during this analysis, and they were at 25 pounds. So they were doing really well. Not so well in other things, but they were doing well in silage. So is that something that you like to keep tabs on too, Ethan, with your feeding software?
So yeah, we're using just this past winter, we implemented one feed from the milk group. Really been a good kind of super simple feeding software to implement, not super capital intensive right up front. So that was a bonus, but as part of that, everyone logs in, has a user profile. So you're tracking all these by user, by guy that's mixing and delivering. It's tracking both the loading and the delivery deviations. And on the homepage of the app that both guys have on their phones, you can see the accuracy by person. On our farm, a couple times, if somebody has a big miss, it's a good chance for a few of the guys to rib him pretty good. He has a down day. So my experience is that haven't had to have a lot of conversations necessarily around it, as with employees, but something that's right there for everybody to see and kind of builds the right mentality.
All right, Gail. We have exhausted our time, but we did get through what we wanted to. So,
well, why don't you give your last? We've been talking a lot about safety in the past couple of weeks, so I see you got a safety slide with general recommendations. I wouldn't mind if you went through that before we jumped into discussion.
Okay. Yeah, you bet. High vis clothing, you want to stand out, you want to be seen. These are high traffic areas in the feeding center, and I'm starting to see more and more farms go to the uniforms that have high vis just built in them, because then you don't have to try to remember to grab a vest or coat or what have you. And then just equipment maintenance, making sure that these shields are intact and you got equipment that's working well, versus equipment that's fallen apart and employees trying to make repairs on the run. It's just a dangerous thing. Never ever enter that TMR wagon without notifying someone and pulling the tractor key. You really shouldn't ever have to anyway, but if you do, Get it parked towards a shop. Don't do it out in the feeding center just in case Joe Blow, thinks he has to load up a heifer batch and dumps corn silage in there and doesn't know, you're in there. It's just a dangerous thing to do. And then the face management slide there that I had, you don't want to walk up to faces that are greater than 6 feet tall in a situation that, silage were to collapse. It would fall on you if you're within a few feet of that face. And then these convex mirrors are really handy if you have any tight corners on the farm, just to minimize any, potential of a freak accident with, like a payloader and a TMR wagon kind of coming at each other at the same time. Those mirrors are pretty slick. And then just having a protocol for removing the plastic and tires. Yeah, it's a common job. No one really likes to do it, but it really dangerous when you think about it. And I'm telling you, these piles and bunkers, they're not getting any smaller. I see a lot of them that are 30, 40 feet tall at the peak. You got people working pretty high off the ground. What about you guys, Ethan? I mean, I know you guys, take a lot of pride in getting employees home safe at the end of the day. I mean, is there anything here that I'm missing that you would add?
No, not, I think you're right on with a lot of the safety stuff. I will say something on the feed outside that has taken us to the next level has been that equipment maintenance. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be new equipment, but it needs to be maintained. And, everyone kind of just keeping an eye on things that touches it and having that open conversation with feeders. If they are having issues and making sure you're getting those issues addressed. There's a lot of things you can't control, whether parlor running ahead or behind, cows down, push outs, employees late. So equipment's one of those things that you can kind of wrap your arms around to a certain extent. So that has really added some value and brought us to the next level on consistency of drop times for our operation.
I guess I'll start with kind of a more general question that I've been asking a few of our speakers. When you walk onto a farm, or Ethan, when you walk outside on your own farm, red flags and green flags, what are some things that immediately catch your eye? Like, oh, this is potentially a problem. This is potentially something with a little bit deeper meaning. It just catches your something maybe not quite right there. And green flags, things where you're like, oh, these people probably have their ducks in a row. For me, I think one of the first things that catches my eye when I walk onto a farm is the face. And I think a nice, the face of a bunk, it tells you a lot about just the attitudes towards detail when it comes to feeding. And so to me, that's kind of my red flag, green flag. What about you, Jordan, and Ethan as well?
Yeah, for me, it's cleanliness and how things are kept up. Like, is there plastic all over the feeding center and tires just randomly thrown here and there? Your face comment is spot on too. Like, if just when things are kept up tight, like attention to detail is a priority, and they're gonna want to go above and beyond whatever it is they're doing on that dairy to achieve results. Yep,
I'd 100% echo that. Face, plastic management, tire, we starting probably 3 or 4 years ago, started stacking all of our tires when we're taking them off the plastic. I think that's added value and, looks better, but it's also cleaner when you're putting tires back on the face. So that means something to me. And then, the overall appearance of the feeding equipment. It might not always be something that really adds function to the equipment, but the overall look of it helps guys have some pride in their job and making sure everything's swept up if I get in a payloader and there are pop cans and trash all over the floor and it looks like it hasn't been cleaned, I'm probably gonna assume a few things. Whereas if I get an equipment that's clean, well taken care of, both mechanically and from a just look standpoint, I think that means a lot too.
Ethan, kind of outline for us. I know growing up, my dad said, this is what you do to every tractor before you turn the key on it. This is what you check on the feeder wagon before you put a loader of feed in it. Just kind of give me your first couple of things you expect your folks to be doing before they fire anything up.
Yeah, you bet. So when I came back to the farm in 2017, and the feeder that had been there almost 20 years. So I was really feeding opposite of him. Shortly after coming back, he decided to retire. So I stepped into the everyday feeding there for probably 6 months to a year. And then ended up training a Hispanic guy that had worked for us for 10 years. And his understanding was a skid loader, basically. Had never been in a tractor. So it took about a month of every single day, pretty much every batch, watching everything. Just started with handing him the keys and getting him to back up a tractor and a TMR. So that was pretty brutal to watch, but it also helped me really streamline things, especially on the maintenance side, and what you need to be looking for. So every day our guys pull in. During the winter, all of our stuff is parked inside in a heated shop. Here in the last couple of years, we've been able to put up a heated shop, which has been, those things are hard to pencil. But when you can roll in and it's -40 and you got feeding equipment in a warm spot, man, that makes a lot of days go quite a bit smoother during the winter. But guys are pulling in, starting, walking up to equipment, checking engine oil, hydraulic oil, all fluids. Then, hopping in it. The mentality is at our place. If you brought it, basically, if it fit in your lunchbox on the way into the cab, it can fit in your lunchbox on the way out, or your hands, whatever. So the understanding is that you keep it, the way you found it. So you're taking all your trash with you. And then, just through spending that much time with him, you realized how much time you spent, in my case, with dad or other relatives on the farm, learning a lot of small things that when you go to train somebody, you don't immediately float to the top of the list on things that you think you need to train them on. But that, I guess I don't have a lot of really good examples right now, but even if the guy who does it probably doesn't have like a great mechanical understanding, but knows to communicate when things don't look right. I mean, he knows what looks good, what isn't. And part of that is keeping small leaks taken care of as they're coming up on hydros, on TMRs, on, all that type of stuff, pointing out hydraulic hoses that are worn through to the cords. So he maybe doesn't have a full understanding of all that, but knows enough to communicate when something doesn't look right to him.
Now, do you use checklists for a lot of that? Or are you light paperwork?
We have not formalized a lot of that, to be honest with you. So it's two guys feed on our farm. And one guy is always there. The one guy, except for 1 or 2 days a week, is always the one that is in the morning starting everything. So it's the same guy defacing every morning, checking over the wheel loader. The opposite guy is checking over TMRs and tractors, trucks, that type of stuff. So don't have checklists, just have gone to more of the consistency of who's in that piece of equipment first thing every morning, which has kind of buffered the lack of a checklist thus far.
So I want to talk about something that you both kind of mentioned at different parts, but feed management software. So Ethan, you said you're using the OneFeed, which happens to be what we also use at the Iowa State Dairy. That's not a formal it's not a pitch or anything. It's just what we happen to also use. Jordan, I'm sure you have a lot of different softwares that different clients of yours use. Do feed management softwares, do they pay for themselves?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, yeah, there are a lot of them out there. In my opinion, you definitely want to invest in a software that, the developers and that company are looking into the future and wanting to continue to make that program better than what it is today. Unfortunately, there's probably a few out there that don't really fall in that camp. But anyway, nonetheless, to answer your question, I do think they definitely pay for themselves. Go back to the slide real quickly. Like, you start adding values to especially mineral mixes here, okay, on deviation. That these become a year's time if it is an issue. But number one, if you don't have the software, you're never going to know this, right? And it gives you that traceability aspect. And I don't think I've ever seen it be a problem where like feeders felt like they were being watched or, like Big Brother type thing. It's like, they have a job to do, and just like you or me, like we're judged on performance, and we want to definitely review it in a professional way, in a positive way. But if there's areas that they're not performing well and with the accuracy, the feeding software, like you just wouldn't be able to do with the feeding software. You just talk generalities. So I think the payback is huge on them. There's no question.
Yep, I would agree 100%. On those deviations, probably the biggest thing is that gap between management and who's doing the mixing and the understanding of what that costs. I just spilt a little bit of canola, or the lactating mineral mix spilt a little bit on the way to the wagon. Well, as part of the onboarding process, we walk through, how those costs multiply, how a percent here or there really adds up. So being able to assign values to that, and then be able to track that through a feed software has a lot of value. And for us, it's just being able to instantly, with one feed, so everything's synced wirelessly. They're tablet-based software, and uses a cell signal, so that you're sending data instantaneously. So, it starts raining, takes you 2 seconds to change dry matters. And pen counts change, something from the herdsman comes through where he's going to change something differently than the way he had pen counts entered in the morning when the guy called feed. Well, you just make that change right there.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of this is utilizing refusals. So we do raise our own replacement heifers. We're able to, on the fly, use refusals either in low lactation pens or with 2 heifers, and change, in a split second, utilize all of the push out and then recalculate the entire batch to utilize all that push out, which at today's feed costs, it pays for itself extremely quickly.
Yeah. Are you doing incentives for your feeders based on this, or is it just, are you just monitoring?
We are not. We aren't doing any type of incentives. Just have been proactive on raising pay, and we're clear with the expectations up front. And so no, we haven't implemented anything there yet. And like I said, in comparison to some farms, we're obviously on the smaller end, just having a couple guys with their hands in it. So it's pretty easy for it to kind of be a pride or a little bit of a competition thing between a couple guys, versus some bigger dairies who might have, 10 guys on there, where it's pretty easy to get lost in the shuffle.
Let's talk for just a second about your push out. What's your target? Tell me how that plays.
Boy, that I don't know those percentages right off the top of my head. We have that all figured out and posted at the dairy, but they're the targets based off of what your group has come up with. Jordan, I don't know if you know any of those percentages off the top of your head as
Yep.
far as.
In general, so like what Ethan's talking, we'd like to have a way back board on farm fed. So then you'd have like every pen, and then for the dairy, percentages really are like whatever. I mean, they want to know pounds, right? So then
Right.
we can help figure out for each pen, like, pen 1, we want 500 pounds because that's 2.5% refusal. Cause that's kind of what we're looking at, is like around 2.5% for your main lactating groups. It would be our target. And then like a low pen, you would want to be 1%, pretty tight. Like you don't really want to have a lot of leftovers for them. And then post fresh, we like to see 7 to 10%. And then pre-fresh would be that same, 7 to 10%. Obviously, really critical groups, you don't ever want them to run out of feed. So we're gonna run refusal a little heavier on them. They're smaller group sizes anyway, so poundage really doesn't become that big of an issue. So does that answer your question, Fred?
Absolutely. Yep.
One thing I'll
Yep.
mention there is with the software and being able to utilize that push out, our previous software didn't allow us to do that quite on the fly. So we ran probably on the tighter end of those percentages. So when you get those big rainfall, snowfall type dry matter change events, we did have cows out of feed. Now we're maybe a slightly heavier on that, but knowing that you can utilize that push out and that, okay, no longer having to throw X amount out when you get over so many pounds, just because it can't be utilized. We're, being able to utilize all that, the amount of times that we have pens out of feed has dropped.
So when you talk about 7 to 10% refusals for your post fresh group, how many days about are they going to be in that fresh pen?
So my ideal fresh pen would be 2.5 weeks. Like I really don't like them going over that. I guess I'll let Ethan speak specifically to his farm, but the reason I don't like him going over that, Gail, is it seems like because especially if you have a specific post fresh ration that's a little higher fiber to help them transition from that pre-fresh diet, you can cap off some peaks if you get out to 30 35 days. So that's why I really like to avoid it. And if we got things humming, we should be able to just kick them out to that high pen after a couple weeks. So
We've talked a little bit about shrink with monitoring a little bit with the software in your deviations, and look at that a little bit. Other places that we can control shrink, lost feed, silages, concentrates, mineral mixes, things that you're doing, Ethan, or things that you recommend, Jordan?
I would say we're just an open face commodity shed. So, you see these totally enclosed commodity buildings, batch boxes, that type of stuff. We're not to that size yet where that's probably feasible. One thing that we do that a few people probably don't, the joke with all nutrition guys, I think, is you can never have enough bays in your commodity shed. No matter how many you put in there, they're still going to want 1 or 2 more. So we are short a bay. We do a premix. We are short a bay to be able to put that premix in there. So to avoid having dry matter changes, that type of stuff, we don't want to do that premix right away in the morning. We just want to show up, start defacing, and start feeding cows. So we're doing that premix at night to avoid those changes of dry matter and some shrink and stuff. We are leaving that. The load does fit in one TMR. We're leaving that loaded in the TMR till morning and then dumping it out. So I would say, that's nothing big, but that is something that we specifically do to help address some of that.
Yeah, wind is going to be a big one. Wherever you can load and not be exposed to elements is going to help a lot on your shrink. The other thing, so we did a summer intern project on this, and I guess stay tuned on more results to come. But like something simple is just smooth surfaces for loaders and equipment to run on. I mean, even farms that have pavement or concrete, like obviously that stuff doesn't last forever. So if you're finding a lot of potholes or eroded areas, and you got a bucket and it jolts and you're losing stuff, like those sort of things are what accumulate over a year's time and contribute to shrink. And then these deviations are definitely a big part of it as well.
I'd say you brought up a good point there, Jordan, on the smoothness of the concrete or asphalt, whatever you have. That definitely helps with shrink, also helps with load time. So load time, you got payloader running plus a tractor and mixer or two. So there's a lot of synergies that occur when you do have a nice level, even loading spot.
What routes of communication do you have between yourself and your feeder? I know you mentioned that your feed management software works really well for that. If you have to adjust dry matter, you can do that real quickly, for example. We've talked a lot on this series about the importance of teamwork and making sure that everybody is kind of on the same page with everything. So what are you doing to make sure that those lines of communication are open? And do you have any, you said that you're a small enough team, you can kind of do a lot of face-to-face. But is that pretty much what you rely on?
Yeah, mostly face-to-face, text once in a while. Of course, as issues arise and, maybe it's a weekend or something, or I'm not on the farm, video, text messaging, FaceTiming, that type of stuff, all gets utilized. So, a little bit of everything. I know some guys are using like WhatsApp, some type, or, some stuff like that. For us, it's just been texting. I will say another person to really have in the mix is your herdsman, not only from a pen count standpoint, but a heads up on transitions in and out of different piles of feed. Just preemptive deal. Hey, this week we're making a switch. Keep your head on a swivel if you start seeing something break in the barns. Those proactive conversations are more fun to have than the "oh my God, everything's falling apart here" type of conversation. So
that actually brings me up to another question I had for you, Jordan. So you talked about that silage transition, and you said you target 5 to 7 days when you're moving between bunks. And so you talked about a third, 2/3, half and half, and then 2/3, 1/3. If you have two silages that are very different for each other, say that starch digestibility, for example, is significantly higher in the bunk you're moving towards, do you stretch that out? Do you approach that transition any differently? Or is that pretty much the 5 to 7 day formula, what you're using across the board?
Yeah. Typically it's what I use. Typically it's what I use across the board. Because the other thing that happens is, now you have two faces that you have to manage. And so it's a double-edged sword. It's like, in your situation you're explaining there is like, it would make sense to probably stretch that out a little longer. But then we also run the risk, especially if we're in the middle of summer, of both faces deteriorating because we're not using enough out of both. So I've kept it pretty tight, and I feel like it's worked out better that way.
I would agree. We actually just came out of a pile, and but by the end there, it's a struggle keeping it fresh, keeping it from heating. One thing that Jordan's group, has brought to our attention that we implemented is, so as you're feeding that face, and you're coming down the slope right at the end of a pile, when you're in that last, for us, it's like 20 feet. you turn and you start feeding 90 degrees from the face that you previously had. So that as you're getting down to that very last little bit of slope where you probably have a little bit of spoilage, you're going to try to do your best to keep some of that out of the TMR, that you're not feeding all of that the very last day, that you're coming at it from the other direction and trying to spread that out.
Well, I guess we are rounding out at about 8 o'clock, so I'll end on maybe a big picture question. So what's the hill you'll die on? So we've talked about, not everything's always going to work out perfect every single day. You're going to have a snowstorm and the tractor's broken and like everything's kind of going out at the same time. It's always either one or the other, right? Either everything's going perfectly or nothing's going well. So, in those circumstances where you can't necessarily hold yourself to that high standard that you normally hold yourself to on a certain day, what's the one thing that you want to make sure gets done absolutely correctly because so much stands on it? All of it, right? Like
yeah,
it's a hard question to finish on. Come on, Gail.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Maybe we'll come up with a softball after this one.
Yeah. It's probably not like the thing at the hill I would for sure die on, but something we have really tried to do that doesn't take a lot of effort other than maybe some self-control is just not interrupting the feeders while they're feeding. So, no matter how bad the day is going, it's the, oh, can I borrow the payloader? We've only got one payloader on our farm, multiple skid loaders. We got a payloader at each location, but they're about 8 miles apart. So resisting that urge to just, oh, hey, I need this for 5 minutes. You throw the rhythm of the feeding off. It's hard to put, to really understand that until you've experienced it. But that's something that is just like a mentality and doesn't necessarily take a lot of effort. It's just kind of that self-control to not interrupt those guys, let them get feed in front of cattle, let them do their job. And then, if you need equipment after that, that's the time to utilize it. Even though it may only seem like a 2-minute little deal to you, it magnifies in the scope of the feeding system.
Defacing the silage, like it just has to happen because like when you think about it, if you shortcut it and you gouge it all up, like you can mess it up for a week plus because the amount of air that you can inject into it, and it just compromises feed, and then it's just a cascade of events from there. So yeah, for me it'd be face management.
Bit that we've done is so at the end of the day, the mentality is that the wheel loader is parked in the commodity shed and it has the defacer on it. The hoses aren't necessarily hooked up, but it's at least attached to the wheel loader. So one thing that is done is not only is that one less trip in and out of the cab for the guy when he shows up in the morning, now he can roll up, hook up hydraulic hoses and hop in the cab, away he goes. He doesn't have to drive over to the defacer, put that on, get back out of the cab, hook hydraulic hoses up. But it's also, as everybody on the farm is using that wheel loader and then having to put the defacer back on before they get done with it, everybody walks past it and everybody's looking at it. So as it's that critical of a piece of equipment, it's kind of a passive thing that we've done that, helps you catch issues with it ahead of time rather than having a breakdown and not being able to deface.
I like that.
I just would be curious, Ethan, you mentioned 2,800 acres. Besides corn silage, do you grow any other forage?
Yep. So we grow corn silage and then haylage too. So we got probably 400 or shade over of alfalfa that goes to the lactating cows. That's all Harv Extra alfalfa, and then it's all BMR corn silage too.
Okay. High moisture corn, anything else other than corn silage?
Used to do high moisture corn, may again down the road, struggled keeping the face fresh during the summer. So have just gone to a real fine ground dry corn, and then obviously have a decent sized cropping operation that we're able to utilize a lot of our own corn that we grow as that dry corn. So
you're doing BMR and conventional corn silage, right?
100% BMR on the lactating. For heifers, we're doing some conventional stuff, but at the dairy with the cows, it's all BMR.
Here's my softball. So maybe this is more for Jordan. I'll preface this by saying we did take our dairy challenge team this past winter to Foresight to see your place up there, Ethan, and there was no low hanging fruit. So it was an excellent practice farm for dairy challenge because it really made them kind of stretch themselves and think.
Promise I didn't pay her, Jordan.
I like going places where it makes them kind of poke around and look for things. So maybe this doesn't apply to you, but for Jordan, what's the low hanging fruit on most farms that you go to? An easy thing that you can see that's kind of the first thing a lot of people can do if they're looking to improve their forage management.
Honestly, Gail, there isn't much low hanging fruit these days, which is good, because that means as an industry we've improved in a lot of areas. Yeah, I would say there's still opportunities around just like simple things like Ethan was talking about after you deface silage of commingling, and because there's going to be nutrient variation across a face, right? So that's the whole reason why we want to deface and commingle. And it doesn't always happen at the frequency I would like to see on farms. And especially if a farm that I'm not working with, I haven't had a chance to really, talk to them about these sort of things. That can be a really simple thing to just really tighten down any kind of inconsistency that would be taking place in the bunk.
So Ethan, for you, what's your next step? I know that you it seems like you have an attitude of, okay, how can we always be improving, right? So what's your next thing that you're kind of looking forward into the future for being able to continue progressing and improving?
I think so a bigger hurdle that we've had, about 600 of our cows are on a slatted barn, 12-foot deep pit slatted barn. And the remainder are on sand bedding in a separate barn that was added later on. But the sizing of our TMR has been limited due to weight restrictions on that slatted barn. And through doing that, we had a TMR at our main site, a dairy that was I think it was a 615. It was like 650 cubic foot, I think, or something like that. And then had a truck mounted TMR at our heifer farm. And they were both used in their respective space, and there was no overlap. Here in the last, it's probably been almost a year, somewhere in there. We started mixing with both of them up at the dairy, utilizing that smaller one just for the slatted barn. So we were doing like 13 batches with that smaller TMR. So it was just kind of a brutal haul for the mixing guy, I guess, at the main site. So we started mixing in tandem, utilizing both the truck and the tractor trailer TMR, and just watching a lot of the synergies that have been driven by little things like not having to get back out of the payloader 13 times. One guy stays in the payloader. It's all the small things. So I think just continuing to drive into the redundant things, and Jordan's group has started looking at it too. I'd started kind of reading about it prior to that, to their group bringing it on, but kind of that lean mentality around the mixing center and how we can drive that cost per ton of mixing and delivery down. I think something you always got to be cognizant of, and especially as we're going up against some of these bigger dairies that have indoor feed centers where shrink is almost non-existent, and have some really big TMRs. So how do you stay competitive with that?
Yeah.